Imagine looking up at the night sky in the 1950s. The stars are silent, distant, and unchanging, or so it seems. But somewhere on Earth, a quiet storm of ambition is brewing. The United States is about to enter a race that will push technology, human courage, and imagination to their limits. This is not just a story about rockets or astronauts. It's a story about a nation dreaming bigger than ever before, about politics, fear, pride, and the relentless drive to reach beyond our world. And it all begins with one question: can humanity touch the stars? By the end of this journey, you'll see that the space race wasn't just about winning, it was about redefining what it means to be human.
In the early 1950s, the Cold War tension between the United States and the Soviet Union was at its peak. Scientists, engineers, and politicians alike were thinking about one terrifying and exhilarating question: who would conquer space first? Sputnik's launch in 1957 shocked the world. The Soviets had placed the first artificial satellite in orbit, and suddenly America felt vulnerable, challenged, and determined. I have to admit, imagining the panic in Washington at that moment is thrilling. Fear truly spurs innovation. The U.S. responded quickly, creating NASA in 1958. But more than politics, this was a battle of imagination and engineering. Rockets had to be bigger, computers faster, and humans ready to endure the unimaginable. Schools changed too. Science and math became urgent priorities. The entire nation felt the pressure, and a generation of young Americans looked at the sky with wonder, ambition, and a little envy. Every satellite, every test rocket, every early failure taught valuable lessons. And let me tell you, watching those early rockets explode or veer off course must have been terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. By the end of the 1950s, the space age had officially begun. The stage was set for a race that would capture the world's imagination.
The 1960s brought the Mercury program, America's first attempt to send humans into space. Men like Alan Shepard and John Glenn became household names, symbols of courage and ambition. I find it fascinating how these astronauts were not just explorers, they were pioneers, carrying an entire nation's pride on their shoulders. Every heartbeat, every launch, every re-entry carried the hopes of millions. Technology was pushed to its absolute limits. Rockets, capsules, and life support systems had to work flawlessly. There was no room for error. And yet, the first missions were triumphant, proving that humans could survive and even thrive beyond Earth's atmosphere. The world watched in awe as the United States slowly closed the gap with the Soviet Union. Television brought every mission into homes across the country, and suddenly, space was no longer a distant dream, it was real, visible, and thrilling. Mercury was small, but its impact was enormous. It proved that the U.S. could compete, innovate, and inspire. Every successful mission built momentum, confidence, and national pride. By 1963, when John Glenn orbited the Earth, Americans were no longer just citizens. They were participants in history, connected to something much bigger than themselves.
After Mercury came Gemini. This program was less about spectacle and more about mastery, perfecting orbital maneuvers, docking procedures, and long-duration flights. Here's my personal reflection. Gemini shows how progress is rarely glamorous. It's tedious, technical, and often invisible, but absolutely essential. The astronauts spent hours in simulators, mastering tasks that would later define Apollo missions. Each success was meticulously planned, and every failure became a lesson. Spacewalks, rendezvous in orbit, and precise navigation all had to work flawlessly to make the moon landing possible. Watching these missions unfold, I can't help but admire the combination of discipline, courage, and creativity. Gemini was where dreams met science, and science met sheer human determination. By the mid-1960s, the U.S. was ready. Not just ready to compete, but ready to do the impossible, land humans on the moon.
July 20th, 1969. Neil Armstrong steps onto the lunar surface and utters those famous words, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." If you ask me, this moment is more than a technical achievement. It's a testament to imagination, collaboration, and perseverance. Millions of Americans watched live, holding their breath as humanity crossed a threshold never thought possible. Apollo wasn't just about astronauts. It was about thousands of engineers, scientists, and workers who made the impossible possible. Every bolt, every circuit, every calculation mattered. The moon landing inspired generations. Kids who watched Armstrong take that first step would grow up dreaming about science, technology, and exploration. The space race had achieved something extraordinary. It had united humanity in awe. Yet it was also a race, a product of competition, politics, and rivalry. Behind the triumph lay decades of pressure, fear, and relentless innovation. And perhaps that tension is exactly what made the achievement so powerful. Apollo showed that when ambition meets vision, the impossible can be achieved. The stars, once distant and untouchable, had been reached. The space race eventually ended, but its legacy continues. NASA's missions, the satellites orbiting Earth, and the technology that grew from space exploration still impact our daily lives. Personally, I see it as a story about human curiosity and resilience. Space exploration isn't just rockets and computers. It's courage, problem-solving, and a belief that we can reach beyond our limits. Today, private companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin are continuing the journey. The dream of reaching Mars or exploring further into the cosmos is no longer science fiction. It's within sight. The space race reminds us that progress often comes from competition, ambition, and audacity. It's a story of a nation and a world daring to dream bigger than before. So when you look up at the stars tonight, remember, the moon landing, Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, they're not just history. They are proof that humanity can reach for the stars and maybe one day touch them.
The space race began as a rivalry, but along the way, it became something far greater. It became a reminder that humanity is capable of extraordinary things when it refuses to accept limits. And although America's drive to reach the moon was fueled by politics, fear, and competition, the result was a triumph that belonged to all humankind. Sometimes I think that the moon landing wasn't just a step onto another world. It was a step into a new version of ourselves. Today, the legacy of that era surrounds us. Every rocket launch, every planetary probe, every space telescope carries a fragment of Apollo's spirit. When I watch modern missions, I still feel echoes of the 1960s, the courage, the uncertainty, the hope. Back then, people looked at the moon and wondered whether humans could ever reach it. Now we look at Mars,
Europa, and distant exoplanets with that same spark of ambition. And honestly, it feels like history repeating itself in the best possible way. America's story in space isn't over, far from it. The Artemis program is preparing to return astronauts to the moon, this time to stay. New companies are building rockets faster than ever. Scientists are designing spacecraft destined for worlds no human has ever seen. I truly believe we're standing at the edge of a new golden age of exploration. Just like in the space race, we're once again pushing towards something bigger than ourselves. But the most important change is not technological, it's philosophical. The space race taught Americans and the world that the impossible is negotiable, that ambition can overpower fear, that creativity and courage can reshape history. And whether you're an engineer, an artist, a student, or simply someone who looks up at the night sky, that lesson still matters. It reminds us that the frontier isn't something out there. It begins with the choices we make. So, as we look to the future, one question remains. Not can we reach the stars, but how far we are willing to go. The space race may have ended decades ago, but its spirit lives on in every mission, every discovery, every dream of a world beyond our own. And maybe, years from now, people will look back at this moment and say, this is where it began. This is where humanity took its next giant leap.